Officer Derek Halston liked being in control. From the moment he put on his uniform each morning, he felt different. The badge on his chest wasn't just a symbol, it was power. When he walked down the street, people moved aside. When he gave an order, they listened. It had been that way for years. He joined the force young, fresh out of the academy. At first, he tried hard to follow the rules. He did paperwork carefully, showed respect to older officers, and kept his uniform neat. But over time, things started to change. He learned which rules could be bent without anyone noticing. He saw how easy it was to look the other way. And he noticed something else. People stopped asking questions around him. They just nodded and did what he said. It gave Derek a certain kind of pride. He told himself he was just being firm, just doing his job. But others started to notice the way he talked to people, the way he handled situations that didn't need force. He would sometimes smile during arguments, like he knew nothing would ever come back to hurt him. Some called him a strong officer. Others whispered that he went too far. Complaints were filed now and then, but they never seemed to stick. Reports would be lost. Cameras would accidentally turn off. And when questions were asked, they didn't go far. Derek knew the system, and the system protected him. In the break room, he laughed with other officers, telling stories from the street like they were jokes. He called himself old school and said the city had gone soft. If people listened the first time, he'd say, "We wouldn't have any problems." No one challenged him, not to his face. He wasn't the worst cop in the city, but he wasn't the kind of officer people felt safe around either. There was something cold in his eyes, something that said he didn't fear consequences. He had gotten too comfortable, too sure of himself. So when the lawsuit came, he didn't take it seriously. Just another name on a piece of paper. Just another angry citizen. This one, he heard, was some kind of writer. He rolled his eyes and muttered, "Let her try." He had no idea who she really was. He didn't know what she had seen or what she was about to bring to the courtroom. Derek thought he was untouchable, but sometimes all it takes is one person, someone brave, someone ready, to make the cracks start to show. And for Derek Halston, the cracks were coming. Mira Sanchez had always been quiet, but never weak. People often mistook her calm voice and steady eyes for softness. They didn't realize how deeply she listened or how much she remembered. She wasn't the type to shout or argue. She was the type to wait, to watch, and to act when it mattered most. For the past 5 years, Mira had worked as an independent journalist, not the kind who wrote about fashion or food, but the kind who asked difficult questions. She focused on people who thought they couldn't be touched, people in power. She didn't work for a big newspaper. She didn't need one. She had her notebook, her camera, and her drive to find the truth. One rainy afternoon, Mira was standing outside a courthouse with a brown folder tucked under her arm. It was thick, filled with notes, printed photos, and records. Each paper inside had taken weeks to collect. She had spoken to people who were afraid to tell their stories. She had waited outside police stations, asked for public records, and studied hours of footage. The name Derek Halston showed up more than once in her research, sometimes in a report, sometimes in a complaint, sometimes in shaky phone videos from frightened bystanders. The pattern was clear to her, even if others refused to see it. Mira didn't just want to write about it. She wanted the truth out in the open, where no one could hide from it. When the chance came to take Derek to court, she didn't hesitate. It wasn't about revenge. It wasn't personal. It was about accountability. People like him believed they could keep doing what they wanted without answering to anyone. Mira planned to prove otherwise. As she walked through the courthouse doors, she felt the weight of her folder, but also the strength it gave her. This was not just paper, it was proof. She didn't have a team of lawyers or a crew of reporters behind her. She stood alone, but she stood ready. Inside the courtroom, she noticed Derek Halston right away. He sat with his lawyer, looking relaxed, almost bored. When their eyes met, he didn't flinch. He gave her a short glance, then looked away, as if she didn't matter. But Mira didn't need him to notice her. She had come prepared. She took her seat, placed the folder on the table in front of her, and waited for the case to begin. Around her, people whispered. Some were reporters. Some were just curious. A few had been following her work online. She didn't look at them. She didn't look at the cameras. Her eyes stayed on the judge's bench. This wasn't about noise. It was about truth. And when the time came, she was going to let it speak louder than anything else in the room. The courtroom was quiet as people took their seats. The sound of pages turning and chairs sliding echoed softly against the walls. Derek Halston leaned back in his chair, arms crossed. He had been in courtrooms before, but never like this. This time, he wasn't wearing his uniform. He wasn't giving testimony as an officer. This time, he was the one being questioned. Mira sat just a few rows away, her folder now open in front of her. She was calm, focused. She had done her homework. She knew the details of every report, every witness, every piece of video. She had built this case one step at a time. The judge entered, and everyone stood. The trial began. Derek's lawyer spoke first. He said this was a simple case. He said Mira was exaggerating, twisting facts, trying to make a name for herself. He smiled as he spoke, confident. It sounded rehearsed. Derek barely moved. He looked around the room like he was already bored. Then it was Mira's turn. She stood slowly and walked to the center of the room. She held a paper in her hand and read from it. It was a short statement, clear, steady, without emotion. She didn't shout. She didn't accuse. She simply explained what had happened the day Derek grabbed her at a protest, how he had ignored her words, how he had acted like she didn't matter. She paused, then looked toward the jury. "This is not the first time," she said quietly. "But I hope it's the last time someone like him can walk away without being held responsible." Derek raised an eyebrow, but said nothing. The judge asked for evidence. Mira stepped to her folder and pulled out the first video. It played on the screen for everyone to see. The room was silent as the clip showed Derek shoving a man to the ground during a peaceful march. There was no yelling in the video, no threat, just people walking, and then force. Derek's lawyer stood up fast. "That's not related to her case," he said. "That's a separate incident." Mira replied, "It shows a pattern." The judge nodded. "We'll allow it for now." Mira continued, showing more clips. Different faces, different streets, but the same kind of force. She brought out old reports, some forgotten, some ignored. She pointed out how body cameras had been turned off more than once, how complaints had been closed without proper review. As the day went on, Derek stopped leaning back. His hands were now clasped together, eyes watching the screen more carefully. It was clear he hadn't expected this. He thought it would be easy. But now the story was being told, not his story, the truth. And the courtroom was listening. The second day of court felt different. People arrived earlier, some with notebooks, others just to watch. Word had spread about the case. The room filled quickly. The reporters sat near the front, ready to write down every word. Some had already written stories online about the quiet woman who came in with a folder and shook the courtroom. Derek Halston sat at the defense table, staring straight ahead. He looked more serious now. His lawyer spoke quietly to him, pointing to a few papers, but Derek didn't respond much. He was no longer leaning back in his chair. Mira returned to her seat with a small stack of documents in her hands. She looked calm, but her eyes showed she was focused. She knew today would matter. Today, she would bring in more than just reports and videos. Today, she had a witness. The judge entered, and the courtroom stood again. Once everyone was seated, the judge nodded to Mira. She called her first witness. A middle-aged man walked in slowly. He wore a plain shirt and kept his hands folded in front of him. His name was Joseph Reed. He had been a street vendor for 20 years. Kind face, soft voice, but when he looked toward Derek, his expression grew firm. Joseph spoke about an evening 2 years ago. He had been packing up his fruit stand when Officer Derek arrived and asked him to move faster. Joseph said he tried to explain that he was almost done, but Derek didn't listen. Instead, Joseph said, the officer pushed over his cart and told him to move or else. The courtroom was quiet. Mira showed a picture of the fallen cart, taken by a tourist that night. Then she played a short video. It showed the cart on the ground, fruit scattered across the sidewalk, and Derek walking away. Derek's lawyer stood up quickly. "This video doesn't prove anything," he said. "You can't hear what was said. There's no clear sign of my client doing anything wrong." Mira didn't argue. Instead, she showed 2 more complaints, filed the same month, both about Derek using harsh words and force over small matters. She looked at the judge and said, "This is not about one bad day. This is about a pattern." The judge nodded slowly, writing something down. As Joseph left the stand, Derek glanced at him, but Joseph didn't look back. More witnesses came after that. A young woman who had been stopped for filming during a protest. A man who had been handcuffed without reason. Each story was different, but they all shared the same feeling. That Officer Derek Halston believed he could do anything without being questioned. By the end of the day, even the people in the back of the courtroom could feel it. The cracks were beginning to show. By the third day of the trial, the courtroom was almost full before the doors even opened. People lined the hallway, some waiting to get a seat, others hoping to hear even a few minutes of the case. Something about the way Mira presented her story had caught the city's attention. She wasn't loud. She wasn't dramatic. She simply showed the truth, one page at a time. Derek Halston walked in wearing the same dark suit, but his face had changed. He looked tired. He didn't smile or nod at anyone. He sat down quietly, eyes locked on the table in front of him. His lawyer kept whispering things to him, but he barely answered. Mira stood when the judge asked for her next piece of evidence. This time, she didn't call a witness. Instead, she held up a printed chart. It showed names, dates, and case numbers. The room leaned in as she explained. "These," she said, "are all complaints connected to Officer Derek Halston over the past 7 years. Most were closed without action." The chart showed more than 20 names. Mira pointed to each row, giving a short summary of what had happened. Some were about rough treatment. Others were about people being stopped without reason. One involved a teenager who had been wrongly arrested and later released with no charges. Mira said she had found these cases by going through public records, one by one. Some were hidden deep in city files. A few had been marked unresolved with no follow-up. She said this wasn't just about what happened to her, it was about what had been allowed to happen for years. The judge looked surprised. Even the jury seemed to shift in their seats. The room grew still. Derek's lawyer stood up. "We don't know the full story behind each of those complaints," he said. "You can't prove Officer Halston was at fault in all of them." Mira didn't argue. Instead, she played a short recording of a woman crying during a phone call. It was from a recorded complaint. The woman said, "I was scared. He didn't treat me like a person. I told someone, but no one called me back." Mira turned off the recording and looked at the judge. "How many people never got a call back?" she asked. There was no answer. And if you're following this story and want more real-life stories that bring hidden truths to light, don't forget to subscribe and stay tuned. Every case matters, and every voice deserves to be heard. The judge leaned forward slightly. "Continue," he said. Mira nodded and went back to her folder. She had more names, more records, more videos. For Derek Halston, this wasn't just about one mistake anymore. This was about a history he thought would stay buried. But now the truth was rising, and it was only the beginning. The defense knew they had to act fast. Too many people in the courtroom were starting to believe Mira. Her quiet voice, steady facts, and long list of records had changed the tone of the trial. Derek Halston's lawyer could feel the pressure building. So on the fourth day, the defense came prepared with a new strategy. They didn't argue about the videos or the complaints. Instead, they tried to shift the focus. The lawyer stood and began speaking with a calm but firm tone. "This is not a case about one officer," he said. "This is a case about how difficult the job of policing can be. People make mistakes. Decisions are made in seconds. It's not fair to judge them later in a quiet room." He showed pictures of dangerous situations. Dark alleys, crowded protests, flashing police lights. He said that Officer Halston had been in high-risk areas for years, that he had arrested criminals, helped victims, and worked overtime during city emergencies. "He has served this city with strength," the lawyer continued. "Yes, complaints were made, but none were confirmed as misconduct. He has always returned to duty. Why? Because he followed the rules the best he could." Derek sat up straighter as his lawyer spoke. It was the first time during the trial that he looked more confident. He gave a small nod as his lawyer reminded the courtroom that officers often face false accusations. He said this could be one of those times. Then, the defense brought their own witness. A retired officer named Bill Marlowe took the stand. He had worked with Derek for years. Gray-haired and serious, Bill spoke clearly. He said Derek was a tough officer, but not a bad one. He said the city needed officers like him. He didn't always smile, Bill said, but he got the job done. I never saw him treat someone unfairly. Mira watched quietly. She had expected this. After the witness stepped down, the judge asked Mira if she had questions. She stood slowly. Sir, she asked, were you with Officer Halston the night Joseph Reed's cart was knocked over? No, Bill replied. Were you present at the protest where I was pushed and detained? No. So what you know is based on your own time with him, not the events of this case. Correct. Mira thanked him and returned to her seat. The judge took notes. The jury looked thoughtful. It was clear the defense was trying to protect Derek's image, and for some, it might have worked, at least for a moment. But Mira knew what was coming next, because the next witness would not be someone from the past. The next witness had seen everything with his own eyes, and he had nothing to gain from speaking except the truth. The room was still when the next witness walked in. His name was Kevin Lewis. He was young, maybe in his early 20s, and looked nervous as he stepped up to the stand. He didn't wear a suit, just a plain shirt and jeans. His hands shook slightly as he held a small notebook. Mira nodded at him from her table, quietly encouraging him to take his time. Kevin had been there the day Derek Halston pushed Mira during the protest. He wasn't a reporter and he wasn't part of any group. He had just been passing by on his way home from work. He had seen what happened, and more importantly, he had recorded it. When Mira found him weeks later, he didn't want to speak. He had been scared. He didn't want trouble. But after seeing how the story was unfolding, he changed his mind. He knew what he saw, and now he was ready to say it out loud. The judge asked him to begin. Kevin took a deep breath. I was walking down Ellis Street when I heard people chanting. It was a peaceful protest. People were holding signs, walking slow. Then I saw the police step in. There wasn't any fight, no one yelling. It was calm. Kevin said he stopped at the corner and pulled out his phone. He had seen protests before, but this time something felt off. I saw Officer Halston grab a woman who was standing near the front. She didn't do anything. She wasn't yelling. She just had a camera in her hand. He grabbed her, pushed her down, and walked away like nothing happened. The courtroom was silent. Mira stood and asked, "Did you record that moment?" Kevin nodded, yes. She walked over to the screen and played the video. The room watched carefully. In the clip, there were no raised voices, just people walking. Then Derek Halston appeared in the corner of the screen. He walked up fast, reached out, and pushed a woman, Mira, onto the pavement. Then he turned and walked away. The video ended. The defense lawyer stood quickly. This video doesn't show what happened before. Maybe she did something off camera. Kevin shook his head. I was watching the whole time. She didn't do anything. He didn't even speak to her first. He just acted. The judge looked closely at the screen. The jury scribbled notes. Mira quietly thanked Kevin and let him step down. He looked relieved as he returned to his seat. For the first time, the courtroom had seen it clearly. Not just heard stories, not just read papers, seen the truth with their own eyes. Derek Halston didn't say a word. He stared at the table, jaw tight. The weight of the case was now too heavy to ignore. The final day was coming, and everyone in the room could feel it. The final day of the trial had arrived. The courtroom was full before sunrise. Reporters stood outside with cameras. Inside, every seat was taken. Even the hallway was crowded with people hoping to hear the verdict. Derek Halston sat quietly, wearing the same dark suit he had worn all week. His lawyer looked tense, flipping through papers, whispering last-minute notes. Derek kept his head down. Mira sat on the other side of the room. She looked tired, but her eyes were steady. Her folder now lay closed on the table in front of her. She had nothing more to show. Now it was up to the court to decide. The judge entered and called the room to order. The jury filed in slowly, each one carrying the weight of the decision. They had watched the videos, listened to witnesses, and studied the evidence. Now they would speak. The judge asked the foreman to stand. "Have you reached a verdict?" he asked. "Yes, Your Honor," the foreman replied. The room held its breath. We find the defendant, Officer Derek Halston, responsible for the use of excessive force in the case presented. We'd also find that previous complaints were mishandled and deserve further review. A hush fell over the room. For a few seconds, no one moved. Then the judge nodded. "Thank you. This court recognizes the courage it takes to speak the truth in the face of power. Justice must never depend on a badge alone. It must depend on actions." Derek did not speak. His lawyer placed a hand on his shoulder, but Derek stayed still, eyes on the floor. Mira didn't cheer. She didn't raise her hand in victory. Instead, she stood up slowly and looked around the room. Many faces turned toward her. Some nodded. Some looked surprised. Others looked thoughtful. Outside the courthouse, people were already talking, not just about the case, but about what it meant. Some said it was a warning. Others said it was a beginning. As Mira walked down the steps, a young woman approached her and quietly said, "Thank you. We've needed someone to speak up." Mira gave a small nod and kept walking. This wasn't about attention. It was about truth. Behind her, the courthouse remained busy. Reporters spoke into microphones. City officials whispered in corners. And inside, officers began reviewing old files, ones that had been forgotten for too long. This story wasn't just about one woman or one officer. It was about how silence can grow strong when no one listens, and how even a single voice, steady and clear, can change everything. And if you followed this story all the way to the end, don't forget to subscribe, because real stories like this matter. And sometimes the truth only rises when someone refuses to sit quietly.